only you and you alone can define your own success, your barriers, and your hurdles, and not your family, not your friends, not your teachers. So you have to be, guided by your intuition, no matter how unnatural it may seem. You have to go out of your comfort zone, because if you don't, you'll just remain at the back of the pack. You won't live life to the fullest potential that you can really be. You have to be inspired. You have to get out there and lead your imagination to all of the peaks. And that's how your dreams will manifest even faster than you thought they could be. And often what tends to happen is that dream becomes even better than what you initially dreamed for. And for me, personally, yes, that's music, but I had a dream of being a Formula One driver.
So it was a super interesting story about how I got the opportunity to do a TED Talk, and I didn't actually apply to do the talk. So it was quite cool because it was quite natural and it was quite organic the way that the opportunity happened. So I was DJing in Luxembourg the year prior to the talk, and I was DJing for International Women's Day. And there was a lady in the audience who happened to work for the Luxembourg-ish government. And her and I got talking, and we sort of had a really good chat. She never told me that she was working for TED as one of the organizers as well. And so we stayed in touch. And over the year, she sort of, monitored what I was doing on LinkedIn and my social media. And literally out of nowhere, like, she messaged me a year later and she was like, hey, I'm part of the organizing committee for TEDx in Luxembourg, and this year's theme is about exploring, explaining, and exciting. And, I've been following what you've been doing, and I think you'd be a great guest to deliver a TED Talk. So would you be up for it? And I literally thought she was joking. I did not believe her. I said yes, but until I got like the official emails, I didn't actually believe like it was genuine. And the thing that makes it super interesting was that basically there was like a slight catch. There was only 6 weeks to go before the actual TED Talk. And so 6 weeks notice to do the talk of your life. And I'd happened to be in 6 different time zones in those 6 weeks, traveling to like more than 6 different countries. I knew that this was going to be a huge challenge. And of course, I wanted to do justice, to the TED stage. And during my sort of research around like how does one even sort of prepare for a TED Talk, I sort of found interesting statistics, like a lot of speakers practice each minute of speech for 1 whole hour. And it was then that I realized I stood at the base of a very, very steep mountain, because I knew I did not have the luxury of time. And of course, I didn't have time either to kind of get any public speaking coaching. Some TED speakers do go to the lengths of getting a scriptwriter. Like, I had none of that. It was literally just fight or flight mode. And, I also had some of the biggest events happening for my companies that I was like solely responsible for as well. And I was DJing between Ibiza and Africa and America. And I just remember back to that time, it was definitely, I think, one of the most stressful times in my life. And I just remember like literally every single break I had, like when I was in the DJ booth, in between sets, just preparing, thinking, like just literally even selling tickets for my events. It was nuts. So that's kind of how the opportunity happened. But yeah, I think sometimes when you're thrown in the deep end, like I'm definitely one of those people that thrives in the deep end. So I think I came out of it on the other side in a good way. So of course, I wanted to pick something that hadn't been explored so much on the TED stage before, but I also wanted to pick something that was super personable to me and also kind of encapsulated the work that I was doing with music and motorsport. And for at least 50% of those 6 weeks, I had serious writer's block. I couldn't think of, something super succinct that you could say in one sentence that would kind of really stand out and be the golden idea worth spreading, right? And I remember I was on a plane back from Dubai, and I was in Dubai for 48 hours, and I was there for some motorsport work, and I was looking back at some of the media captured from that event, and this picture just sort of screamed back at me, and it was this picture of basically me sitting in this Formula 3 car, just taking it on the track. And basically in this picture, you see somebody wearing a helmet. You can't tell if it's a girl or a boy. But behind that car is basically a campaign that says "Don't crack under pressure." And some of you guys may have seen this. It's a very famous hashtag now that Tagger has basically coined. And it was one of their campaigns. And as I was reading that, I was thinking, wow, like actually, underneath that helmet, nobody really knows what's going on. And what was going on was that basically I had been diagnosed with dyspraxia, which is a motor coordination delay that actually affects 1 in 10 people. And of course, music and motorsport are extremely coordinated disciplines. And I had stayed extremely private about this diagnosis that I had basically received at the age of 15. And perhaps, some of it was almost not believing that it would limit me from achieving what I wanted to do, because basically by the time I was 15, I'd already discovered my callings of music and motorsport. And I was determined that this thing wasn't going to affect what I went on to basically do in my career. And also maybe part of it was imposter syndrome. So when I was looking back at that picture and I was thinking, what's going on underneath the helmet, and how did I even kind of get to this place in my life where, driving a Formula 3 car and, DJing around the world and all that stuff. And something resonated with me that made me think back to when I actually got the diagnosis. And basically the educational psychologist told me that in order to stay up with this very academic institute that I was in, I had basically been rewiring my brain to kind of stay in that system. And to be honest, I never really understood that, when she told me that in the beginning, and it didn't really like sink into me, like what does that actually mean? I think for me at that point, it was like I was much younger and I wasn't so in tune with my emotions. And then I kind of just 15 years, they pass by and you've gone and you've done it. And so when I was sort of thinking about the topic, I was thinking, well, how did I actually do that? And I had this huge, profound moment of deep reflection for a good 6, 7 hours. And I really thought about, what I had basically done to achieve that. And I thought, right then and there, this is the call to action that I'm looking for, because on the one hand, there was, I know for sure, rewiring my brain through music and in my case, motorsport, but also that was compounded by the external environment as well. I was extremely bullied in school. And so I felt like this talk about rewiring your brain through music and sports could be something that resonated with a lot of people and also exposed some of the fundamental flaws of the educational system. Because pretty much after my diagnosis, it was kind of like, you just get some extra time and that's it. There's no more like, we're going to work with you and help you understand how to optimize your surroundings. You're just kind of left to figure it out for your own self. And so once I'd really nailed, understood the tagline, as it were, that was basically 7 days before the talk. And from there, the words just started flowing super fast. I was just free flow writing, in my optimal sort of zone. And then it became a process of really working with the TED team to just really nail the concept. I remember I sent the speech to a couple of my trusted journalist friends. And then we were basically ready to go to memorize the whole thing, right? And then there was also one sort of slight caveat with that, and that was that it just so happened to be that that year's TEDx conference was taking place in the Philharmonic Hall in Luxembourg. And being a musician, talking about music, obviously there's no better way to explain the journey of music than through actually painting it sonically with your sound. So I asked the organizers, would I be able to kind of complement my talk with a music performance, which they loved and they agreed to. But that also threw a sort of challenge to us, because basically that meant I'd have to cut down the speech by 5 more minutes, because you only have 18 minutes to do the talk. So this whole speech had to basically be 13 minutes, plus it had to factor in for this performance, of which I then had to kind of, work with my sound engineer to make sure that I was able to perform this properly. A Philharmonic Hall, obviously so prestigious, but also not really designed for dance music as well. There's a lot of reverb. And so, we had to spend some time as well, learning how to kind of perform this live and also optimizing it to the room. So it's been said by the National Institute for Mental Health that 73% of humans fear public speaking more than death. Now, that is a truly shocking statistic, but the truth is the pressures and paranoia of failure when the stakes are extremely high, and especially one of the highest being the TED stage, those pressures are super real. And I think as humans, our fears around that kind of go back to our primal roots, because we were in an environment where we perceived predatory animals as a huge threat to our basic existence. And we'd have all these kind of eyes watching us, as back in those kind of times. And so today, it's completely different. Obviously, it's humans who watch us, and we have a digital landscape where millions of people can kind of tear you apart, and the consequences of communicating eloquently while you're delivering something like that, and you basically lay out your most vulnerable self. But the consequences, obviously, in a harsh online and physical world is I think enough to send most bodies into like a frozen state. And so I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It was absolutely terrifying, and particularly because the lead up before that, those 6 weeks, so many different time zones, huge events, DJing, not getting enough sleep during all of those sort of 6 weeks, and having this pressure of writing this killer talk. It was a huge lead up, and then unsurprisingly the night before I just could not sleep. We literally tried everything. My sister gave me a face mask, she made me take chamomile tea, I had a bath, but my brain literally refused to switch off. And before I knew it, it was 7 a.m, all systems go, time to get up, sound check, this and that, and suddenly the day was basically upon us. And I remember I wasn't one of the first people to speak. I was kind of I was the speaker after lunch, and I just remember sitting there, and a few speakers had obviously gone on before me, and they had set the bar really, really high for the stage. I remember we had this guy called Sebastian Bellin, who's a professional basketball player, and he had been caught up in the 2016 Brussels terrorist attack, and he had basically lost mobility. And he gave this incredibly moving, empowering speech. The audience were literally in tears. And also there was 1,500 people in the room, and it was a sold out audience. And I remember my sister was literally my hero. Just before going on stage, we were backstage. She was literally doing lion's breath with me to kind of get more tension released from my lungs and my chest, and doing deep meditation, breathing exercises. And then before I knew it, it was my time to perform. So, get onto the stage, and the first thing you're met with is this room is huge, there's 1,500 extremely eager, extremely curious eyeballs looking directly at you. And the way that I designed the talk basically was to just literally first line start off with a question. And the reason I did that was to basically evoke a sense of curiosity, and kind of break down the ice, and kind of create a connection with the audience, and take my time to really absorb the audience, and kind of absorb the space, and kind of just observe it. And so obviously, while I asked this question, which was a very universal question, the question was, how many of you guys in the room struggle with maths? So I think a lot of people can kind of, answer that question, and also wonder well, what has that got to do with this talk, right? And that question kind of led on to the fact that if you struggle with maths, there's actually many more things you could struggle with, not being able to, perhaps, for example, in the early years, cut properly with a scissor, being clumsy, all of these signs, which are basically telltale signs of having dyspraxia, which can basically emerge from literally the age of 3. And so I asked this question, and basically once I did that, and the first couple of minutes started kind of, flowing, then it was much easier to get into a natural rhythm. The fear wasn't so much there. You developed a relationship with the stage, with the room. And then before I knew it, it was kind of over. And I know that I had forgotten a couple of some of the paragraphs I was meant to have spoken about. But then I also had my musical performance, and this is where, the pressure didn't stop, basically, because we had done the sound check before the talk. And now I've painted this huge picture of, my music, what it means, the whole exploration, the journey towards getting to this sound, all of this stuff. And, basically when I went to start my live performance, none of the equipment worked. And, that was obviously really quite devastating, because at the same time I really wanted to perform the music, as DJ, I love performing, I love sharing sounds. And the audience were really, really nice. They started cheering for 5 minutes, and that gave me enough time to do a Control-Alt-Delete, just reboot the system. And luckily, once I did that, basically it started working, and it was all good. And then, when it ended, I felt extremely relieved. I know that I'd given it absolutely every single ounce of energy that I had in those 6 weeks. And as soon as I finished, I felt so zapped, I never felt so zapped in my life. And there was this huge flurry of media and people, all just kind of trying to meet you. And I just remember me and my sister, we left the auditorium at that point. We went outside, got some fresh air, and we just like sat down on a bench, and I think I passed out for a few minutes. But yeah, so, of course it was absolutely terrifying, the lead up, the moment. But once you got on that stage, you get into your flow state. It's a message that clearly means something to you and hopefully to other people. And you only have one shot. So, you got to make the most of it. So I mentioned earlier that, a lot of TED speakers spend about 1 hour practicing every 1 minute of speech. And that might seem counterintuitive. It may seem like a speech isn't so natural if somebody has to go towards that length. But the truth is that the best speakers in the world prepare for the TED stage in this way. And this is for two very, very crucial reasons. The first thing is that they can maximize their focus on other parts of the speech, which are equally as important, such as vocal range, body language, pronunciation. All of these things are extremely important in making a powerful speech. And the beauty of TED Talks is that they literally take away all of the physical barriers. Like, everything is taken away. There are no lecterns, there are no notes. So an audience can really tell if you're being authentic in your message. And the second thing is that when you're on that stage, more likely than not, you're going to experience a brain freeze. And this could happen for literally the smallest of reasons. There could just be the smallest thing that triggers you. And for example, that could be, you're in your speech and suddenly, you're walking around on stage and you see this huge screen looking back at you, which is on the stage, and it's your countdown timer. And you can imagine if, you're sort of halfway through, but you actually only have like 2 more minutes, you're going to trip out in your speech. And if you have practiced this much, then your brain basically develops its own sort of muscle memory, and it allows you to kind of bounce back really fast so that the speech seems natural. It doesn't seem to the audience that something happened internally in your mind when you're relaying back the speech, because it really is like fight or flight mode on that stage. So there are, as you guys probably know, so many amazing TED Talks out there. The ones that I found very, very helpful when I was preparing my speech, number one was Do Schools Kill Creativity by Sir Ken Robbins. That was a masterclass performance. Then there was a speech called Your Body Language May Shape Who You Are by Amy Cuddy. And this was also really, really helpful because I didn't have time to have like a public speaking coach or anything like that. I actually did get a little bit of time literally the day before with the organizer who happened to be a public speaking coach, but I only had 1 hour with him. So, all of that stuff about understanding body language and the importance of that, that's a great speech to watch. And then lastly, I would also recommend How to Speak So That People Want to Listen by a guy called Julian Treasure. He also gave a fantastic speech about, the importance of that vocal range, that communication, all of those things. So those would be my top 3 videos to watch if you're in the lucky position of getting the chance to do a TED Talk. So what would be my top 5 tips for anyone who is giving a TED Talk? And I'd say number 1 is read the book. Chris Anderson's got a fantastic book about how to give a TED speech. It's like the official guide. And because there are so many sort of like guidelines, it's a great book to kind of really digest and sink your teeth into. And also, even if you're not doing a TED speech, it's just a great book for public speaking anyway. Number 2, I alluded to my sister earlier, and it's absolutely, no doubt that if you have somebody by your side who is your support network, that is literally, going to take away a lot of the pressure. Like, somebody's just there who's got your back, helps you out. Like, I remember one of my friends, she did a TED Talk a year later and her boyfriend came and gave her like a massage. All of these things, they really help just to kind of get relaxed and be in a comfortable sort of state. Number 3, and I will say I didn't get the chance to actually use this one because I only wrote the speech literally 7 days before. So the presentation itself, you are allowed to have a presentation on the screen, which isn't meant to have like many sort of text, isn't meant to have so much text on it. But if you're smart, you can use those slides as a sort of visual cue to kind of, get back to somewhere if you forget what your next sequence is going to be or something like that. So definitely design those slides quite carefully. Number 4, definitely work with a public speaking coach if you can. I mean, this speech is going to live on the internet far beyond the room that you're in. Like, my talk, I think, has been watched more than 150,000 times. There was 1,500 people in the room. Like, you can imagine, you want to get this right. You want to create that imprint on the internet. If you could have one talk that people can see for the rest of their life from you, this is it. And, you want to work with somebody who can really amplify your message. I remember for me, the organizer, he picked up on some things that like I didn't even think about. And some of those things were like, he told me, take a pause and walk to the other side of the stage. And to me, that might seem at the beginning, it was like super unnatural. Like I'm totally just cutting my speech off and stopping in silence. And that sounds very scary, like leaving silence, to such a big audience. But actually, the more I did it, I realized he actually made so much more sense, because when you then walk across to the other side of the stage, it looks like you're in control of the room, and it does end up feeling that way. And it also allows your brain to kind of just absorb like what you were doing, remind yourself of what the next piece is. So that was like a fantastic tip that the coach gave me, as well as some other tips as well, which is super important. And then, lastly, I would say pick a topic that's unique to you. I mean, it should be an idea that is worth spreading, but at the same time, it shouldn't really be about the publicity. I think a lot of people get caught up in the fact that they want to be a TED speaker, to leverage their network, to leverage their product, get exposure for their service or their business. And, your audience can tell, because the message becomes less authentic, and it kind of gets lost in translation when you go down that route. And I truly believe that doing a TED Talk, yes, it's about pushing yourself. It's going to be one of the hardest things that you've probably ever done in your life. And at the same time, you can't crack under pressure. Like, you want to go out there and you want to own it. And you also, at the same time, you want to empower as many people around you, because that is why people come to look at TED Talks. They go there to find out something and to basically have this idea that's worth spreading, right? And I think when you go deep into that message and you make it unique, you make it yours, that's when the beauty of magic and the beauty of manifestation happens.